All right. This presentation serves as my key assessment for the course Read 501. I will be discussing theories in action through the many field videos I watched during this course. I will also be discussing teaching practices and grouping that I observed in those field videos. Introduction. The information in this section comes from Tracy and Morrow and Gambrell, and the articles cited on this slide. Understanding theory is central to the work of an educational practitioner. An education theory is defined by Tracy and Morrow as a well-documented phenomenon related to teaching and learning. Theories can be used to explain learning, motivation, memory, achievement, and intelligence. Knowledge of theories and belief in different theories directly links to a teacher's behaviors and practices in the classroom. The types of lessons you teach and the way you react to behaviors in the classroom is directly influenced by the types of educational theory you believe in. The quote on this slide is the exact reason why it is so important for teachers to have knowledge of theory. The link between theory and behavior is the central reason that knowledge of theories is essential for optimal classroom instruction. If a teacher has knowledge of many different theories, they will be able to pick and choose strategies that fit each classroom lesson or situation the best. The article by Hike described the 6 ways to honor the learning process in the classroom. This had many links to theory as theory seeks to describe and target the learning process. This article first mentions that the learning process is ever changing because technology is always improving. Students are growing up with this new technology, so the way they take in information is changing as the technology improves and as we incorporate new things into the classroom. Hike explained that we as teachers need to become aware of our own knowing and not knowing, and we need to teach students to do so as well. Some of the 6 ways to honor the learning process in the classroom includes using learning taxonomies to illuminate understanding and to guide instructional design, using concept maps in lessons with students, and this relates to scaffold theory, and using a variety of assessment tools and types, and to utilize metacognition in units. This article really helped to connect the idea of using theory in the classroom to some of practical applications of doing so. So using best practices. Best practices are existing practices like classroom activities, management styles, assessments, or strategies that have a high level of widely agreed effectiveness. The quote on the slide comes from Oliver, who writes, "We teachers are standing on the shoulders of giants before us who have developed tried and true strategies by testing them out, reflecting on the outcomes, and honoring those strategies over decades or longer." This quote speaks to why it is important to use these strategies and teaching techniques that work. They have already been put through the ringer, and we know they work time and time again, so it makes sense to use them. Some common best practices pointed out in the article include checking for understanding in multiple different ways, the backward planning of units and lessons, modeling behavior, and giving students a model or example of the expected finished product before assessing them. The key to using best practices in the classroom is ensuring that practices and activities you are using have evidence to support them. The 10 evidence-based best practices for comprehensive literacy instruction from Morrow and Gambrell provides teachers with a guide to creating engaging and meaningful literacy encounters for their students that are evidence-based. So next we are going to talk about the theories that I was able to view in my video observations. All of the theory information in this section comes from Tracy and Morrow, and all of the videos come from Atlas. The first theory I will be discussing is associationism. This theory was first discussed in the writings of Aristotle and then later described by John Locke. Associationism looks at how events or ideas can be related to one another in the mind, resulting in learning and associating one thing to another. There are 3 types of associates: contiguity, similarity, and contrast. Contiguity is the idea that things that occur together in time or space become associated in the mind. Similarity is the idea that people associate things that have similar features or properties. Contrast is the idea that people can associate things that are opposite with each other, like light and dark or happy and sad. In the classroom, this theory aims to build on prior knowledge, and it allows students to make connections to prior knowledge during a lesson. The video that I watched was of a 6th grade ELA lesson. Throughout the entire beginning of this video, the teacher was reviewing what the class has been learning and talked about what they've been learning and talking about for the past few class periods. By activating the students' prior knowledge and allowing them to review what they have learned, the teacher is using associationism. The students will be using what they have learned and been taught in the past to make connections and complete the writing assignment they have been working on. The teacher also provided the students with many models of figurative language being used in a narrative writing piece. This will let them make connections, and they are able to look at how these ideas all relate to each other. This allows them to see that narrative writing often features figurative language, so students can recognize that when they see figurative language being used, they are reading a narrative text. This relates to the contiguity type of associationism, because the students are looking at how two things or ideas are occurring in the same space and time. The next theory I will discuss is unfoldment theory. This theory was first described by John Russo and John Dewey. It didn't become impactful to education until the 1900s. This theory is in direct contrast with mental discipline theory, which says that students need repeated practice and rote memorization of concepts. This theory instead says that students' minds are strengthened through their own individual curiosity and interests. Their minds will unfold into learning naturally. Unfoldment theory is all about learning through feeling and passion by focusing on what you like and are interested in. This will allow you to learn new things. In the classroom, this theory allows students to have choice in what they study, so they are looking into topics that interest them. It can also look like letting students have choice during a lesson, which was the method in the video that I watched of a 7th grade geometry lesson. This video is a great example of unfoldment theory in action. The lesson that this teacher is conducting involves an investigation on the part of the students to determine the formula for a circle. The teacher has provided the students with many materials to use in their investigation, and they are told to try different things to determine the formula. The teacher sits down with a group of students who seem stuck during the video, and she offers them guidance by asking them questions that allow them to think about the methods they are trying and what they could try instead or what they could do next. By providing students with materials and letting them loose to figure something out, this is an example of unfoldment theory. Unfoldment theory says that a student's mind is strengthened through individual discovery and interest. So while this lesson was designed and distributed to the whole class, they had many different opportunities to choose from when approaching their process of finding the formula for a circle. Next, I will describe transactional reader response theory. This theory was created by Louise Rosenblatt in the 1970s and looks at the way readers interact with the text during the act of reading. This theory is an extended application of schema theory because every person has a different schema specific to the individual. Every reading experience is unique to that individual. There are two different kinds of responses to a text. Afferent responses are fact-oriented, and aesthetic responses are personally and emotionally based. Everyone learns and processes information differently, which is the takeaway from this theory. In the classroom, this theory can be used to help teachers understand why students may take away different information from a text than others, and it can explain the different connections that students make to a story. The video I watched was of a 1st grade ELA lesson. This video provided a great example of the transaction reader response theory. This whole lesson was about making connections to what the students have read in the text, The Snowy Day. The teacher gives the students an example of a connection that she made to the text, and then asks the students to work with a partner to write their connections to the text. While the students were working on their connections, the teacher walked around the room to discuss them with the students. A large part of transaction reader response theory is the individual reader's response to a text. The teacher is discussing one student's specific reaction later in the video and their connection to the text. She does this with all of the other students throughout the video. She asks them different questions about the text and guides them with her questioning to deepen their connections. She asks one student to read the part of the text that she had a connection with, and then she asks the student what about that sentence made them think of their own life. This relates directly to transactional reader response theory and the aesthetic type of response. The students are being asked to make emotional or personal responses to what they have just read. The next theory I will talk about is metacognition theory. This theory was influenced by many different researchers and theorists listed on the slide and was created in the mid-1970s. Metacognition is thinking about one's own thinking. This helps readers become aware of their own thinking during the reading process, which can lead to increased text comprehension. In the classroom, students are able to think about what they are doing and how they are doing it. They are able to recognize when they may have done something incorrectly, and they can correct their mistakes. The lesson I watched that used this tool was conducted in 9th grade English class. The video showed the teacher working with a group of students who are editing papers. The students were evaluating their peers' written papers about the text Animal Farm for their strengths and weaknesses. There was a really great example of metacognitive theory at the very beginning of this lesson. One of the students in the group takes a correction and applies it to her own writing. She begins to think about her own thinking and her own writing, which is really important in the editing process. By having the students review their peers' work, they are able to think about their peers' writing and their own writing while editing. Editing is a very metacognitive process, so this entire lesson is a great example of this theory. Later on in the video, the group is asked to explain one of their suggestions for the paper they were looking at. By asking the group members to explain what they had discussed, they are able to talk about their thoughts, which allows them to reflect on what they were thinking while reading and editing the paper. A running theme in this class was the struggle with wordiness in their writing. By having the students all discuss their difficulties, they are able to brainstorm solutions and think about how they can correct that in the future. I really enjoyed this video because I felt that the lesson was impactful for the students who were completing it. The teacher was having very candid conversations with the students who were not afraid to admit their writing faults and areas of improvement. It was an important showing of metacognition at work, and it proved why this theory is so important to include in the classroom. Now I will talk about one of the nutritional lenses: nutrition, hunger, and obesity basics. This lens was put out by the World Health Organization in 2010 and explains the impact of nutrition, hunger, and obesity on student academic performance. They define world hunger as the want or scarcity of food in a country at the world level. Malnutrition is the condition that develops when the body is deprived of vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients it needs to maintain healthy tissues and organ function. The two types of malnutrition are protein energy malnutrition, a lack of calories and protein, and micronutrient malnutrition, a lack of essential vitamins and minerals. Poverty is a primary cause of world hunger. Hunger affects approximately 15 million children in the US, which is 1 in 7 households. 32% of children in the US are overweight and 17% are obese. Children classified as normal weight or overweight and obese have different brain functions when performing tasks. All of these conditions will impact the way a student performs in school. One way this can be seen in the classroom is in the way that normal weight children can outperform overweight and obese children academically, and overweight children can outperform obese children academically. The video I watched that related to this theory was done in a 12th grade English classroom. This lesson is all about whether or not the government should take a stance on obesity. The theory that can be seen in this, obviously, is the nutritional lens. Because the teacher had the students take a deep dive on obesity. The students were working through a class discussion of their opinions on the government's role in obesity. Early on in the video, one student is talking about their opinion that the government should play a role in media portrayal of obese people. Another student chimes in and says that it doesn't matter if the government gets involved because it is all up to the individual. Later on, one student states that he disagrees and agrees with the points that have already been stated. I think that by bringing this difficult issue into the classroom, the students are able to critically think about obesity and how the government plays a role. This allows them to use their research strategies and the skills they have been working on to find research that supports the way they feel about obesity in America. I really enjoyed watching this video because I think having these open types of conversation are so important, and using taboo topics such as obesity allows students to see that it is okay to talk about this stuff, and it allows them to speak their minds when they're while being supported by research that they already conducted. The next theory I will talk about is social constructivism. This theory was created by Lev Vygotsky and states that children learn from their social interactions with other people. A child's development depends on their interactions with sign systems, which are oral and printed language. Through the use and manipulation of the sign systems, children learn the most about language. The zone of proximal development refers to the ideal level of a task, difficulty, needed to facilitate learning. A child can be successful with the appropriate amount of supports in their zone of proximal development. Another key component of this theory is scaffolding, which is the assistance that adults or other peers provide during learning. In the classroom, the teacher would study the students' interactions during literacy learning, and they would ensure that all literacy tasks completed with others would fall into the student's ZPD. They would address reading problems through the learning from peers. The lesson I watched for this theory was done in the 11th and 12th grade English classroom. The lesson is a great example of social constructivism. The students are working together and talking about the language used in Hamlet. The teacher is simply observing the various groups, and the students are doing all of the talking until later on, and the teacher joins in. This relates to social constructivism because the students are learning through these interactions with their peers. The teacher asks the students in one group a question, and they discuss the answer. I think that by using a lesson like this to digest the difficult language of this piece is important because it allows the students to really think through the words used and talk with their peers to gain a better understanding of the language. Later on in the video, a student is explaining their thoughts, and the other group members are listening to what she has to say. This shows that they are learning from what she is saying and proves that social constructivism can be very beneficial in the classroom. Towards the end of the video, one student gives her opinion of the text, and the other students reply to that by offering a different point of view. This shows that the students may interpret the text differently and help to demonstrate the importance of social constructivist type lesson in the classroom, because these students are able to share their differing viewpoints and potentially learn what the other side has to say. This type of lesson allows the students to work through their own thoughts and learn with each other. Next, I will discuss schema theory, which was developed by Rumelhart and other cognitive psychologists in the 80s and 90s. This theory tries to explain how knowledge is created and used by learners. This theory says that people organize what they know into knowledge structures or schemata. These structures are always evolving to include new information as we learn. People have schema for content as well as strategies and processes. In the classroom, schema is important for teachers to know because of activating background knowledge. This is one of the most important things teachers can do before starting a lesson, and it directly relates to schema theory. The lesson I watched for this theory was done in a 4th grade English classroom. This lesson shown in the video starts out with the teacher conducting a short review on how to make an inference. She directly states that the students need to activate and utilize their schema when making inferences. This lesson focuses on using background knowledge and text evidence to make an inference. By asking the students questions about how to make an inference, the teacher is having the students use their own schema. The teacher also points out a graphic organizer that she has provided for the students to use when making inferences. This relates back to schema theory because the students are able to organize their information on paper before organizing it in their thoughts. This allows them to better process the information. I think it is really important that the teacher is bringing up the term schema to her students. Not only does this lesson use schema theory by having the students activate their prior knowledge, but the teacher points this academic term out to the students. It is good for them to know the word for their own background knowledge, and I think it is important that this teacher uses it with them. Before starting the lesson, she once again outlines that the students will need to use information from their book and their own schema or personal knowledge to make an inference about the text. The teacher asks the students to use what they read in the book and their background knowledge to make an inference about the text. The rest of the video goes through multiple examples of this technique, which is very influenced by schema theory. The last theory I will be discussing is inquiry learning theory. This theory was created by John Dewey, who was one of the first American constructivists. This theory states that the growth of the individual comes from problem-based learning activities. This approach focuses on what is motivating to the learner. It promotes collaboration and cooperation and the use of a democratic style in education. The teacher should create and use interesting experiences that will make the students more interested and engaged in the learning. A quote from Tracy and Morrow on this theory says, "It is the educator's job to create an enticing curriculum and a supportive, motivating environment in the classroom. In the end, it is the students who much actively create his or her own learning." This theory is all about engagement through curiosity and wanting to learn more. The lesson I watched for this theory was done in a kindergarten classroom. The teacher asked the students to complete a think, pair, share activity. This activity comes from a constructivist learning approach. It can relate back to inquiry learning because the teacher is setting up an opportunity for the students to learn together in an engaged setting. By providing the students with prompts for their speech, they are able to start the conversation with ease, and they are able to dive deeper into their own thoughts more quickly. This activity shown in the video is a strong example of constructivist theory and inquiry learning theory because the students are building and solidifying their knowledge of clouds by talking about them together. They are able to collaborate and discuss the material, which allows them to store the information at a higher level in their memory. I love the use of think, pair, shares in the classroom because it lets students dive deeper into the topic and it lets them talk with each other in a constructive, social manner. This lesson also allowed the students to think about what they were interested in from the videos and other materials that they looked at when they were talking about clouds and rainbows. And the students were able to use what they thought was interesting to formulate their sentences, which also correlates to inquiry-based learning. All right, so Morrow and Gambrell describe 10 best practices for effective literacy instruction in their text. Each of these practices could be seen in the video observations I conducted. The next few slides will provide an example of each best practice in action. I will also be discussing the teacher's role in each of those lessons. There are 5 different roles of a teacher. There are 5 different roles that a teacher can take on while in the classroom, and each one contributes to the way that students take in literacy instruction. There is explicit instruction, modeling, scaffolding, facilitating, and participating. I will briefly mention what role the teacher took in each lesson. After discussing each of the 10 best practices, I will talk about how teacher dispositions and how they impact the classroom environment. All of my resources for this section are also shown on this slide. So, the first best practice is implement practices that invite students to be active, contributing members of a literacy community. I could see this in the 6th grade lesson that I watched, where students began the lesson by actively participating in a question and answer review of background knowledge. This meets the first characteristic described by Morrow and Gambrell because the students are being asked to be active and contributing members of the literacy community. In this portion of the lesson, the teacher is in the facilitator role because she is running a review by asking questions that spark student input and conversation. The second best practice is understand that maintaining an engaged community requires the ongoing monitoring and adjustment of literacy practices. I could see evidence of this in the 7th grade geometry lesson because the students were actively engaged in trying to determine the answer to the math problem. The teacher was continuously walking around to different groups to ensure the students were understanding the lesson and answering any questions they may have had, so she was monitoring and adjusting the lesson when needed. This teacher was taking on the role of a facilitator as well because she was helping when needed and allowing the students to complete a project with little teacher guidance other than those initial directions she gave. The third best practice is promote engagement in your community of learners by planning and delivering literacy instruction through the ARC, which is access, relevance, and choice. While this mostly applies to literacy lessons, I could see evidence of choice in the 7th grade geometry lesson. While the third best practice usually relates to reading instruction and having choice in text, I would say this teacher showed how to use choice in a math lesson. She provided the students with multiple materials and allowed them to choose what they wanted to use to get an end result. This teacher was taking on the role of the facilitator because she was helping when needed and allowing the students to complete the project with little teacher guidance, other than the initial directions that she gave. The fourth best practice is provide students with small group differentiated instruction that reflects the complex nature of literacy: reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, and representing. The 4th grade English lesson I watched demonstrated the benefit of using small groups in the classroom. The best practice mentions that creating lessons that are differentiated for small groups. This teacher created a lesson for the small group that she was working with at the time. I can assume that this group was placed together because they are all of like ability, because this is a skill-based lesson where they're working with inferencing. However, I do not know this for sure because I couldn't find the information in the reading of the lesson. But having a small group for this lesson is important for the flow and the way the teacher is teaching inferencing to the students. The role of this teacher was modeling and scaffolding. She was showing the students how to inference and provided them with scaffolds like a graphic organizer that they could use during the lesson. The 5th best practice is utilize a wide variety of text: fiction, nonfiction, poetry, digital, periodical, within and across all content areas. This was difficult to find in the videos because most of the lessons just focused on one text. I can assume that this best practice was at play in the 12th grade English lesson because the students used information they gathered from many different resources. I do not know for sure what those resources were, but the students had to read a variety of texts to prepare for that discussion. The role of this teacher was as facilitator because she was helping to guide the class discussion without interjecting or taking over the conversation. The 6th best practice is promote close reading and critical thinking by engaging students in annotation, text-based discussions, and writing with evidence. This can be seen in the 11th and 12th grade English lesson. This lesson showed evidence of the 6th best practice because the students were critically viewing the text and they were using their strategies to closely examine the language used in the piece. While watching the video, I could notice that students were directly marking their text with information they wanted to remember or that they wanted to relate to a certain part of the text. So they were annotating what they were reading. In this video, the teacher's role was as facilitator and participant. At some points during the video, the teacher became an active participant in the groups taking place in the different discussions that were going on. The 7th best practice is use formative and summative assessments that reflect the complex and dynamic nature of literacy. This can be seen in the 1st grade English video. This teacher walked around and asked the students questions while they worked. She also asked them to read to her. These can both be seen as formative assessments, and the final product they are creating or will create at the end of the lesson can be seen as the summative assessment for this lesson. This teacher is taking on the role of facilitator because she's asking questions and discussing with the students about concepts that they have already been taught. The 8th best practice is replace less relevant guided practice, worksheets, repetitive center-based drills with more authentic inquiry-based opportunities to experiment and apply evolving literacy strategies. This can be seen in the 4th grade lesson. The 8th best practice is shown in the way that the students are acting as detectives to find information. They are not simply completing a worksheet and making an inference. They are being detectives in a text to make connections and make specific inferences. In this lesson, the teacher facilitated the flow of information and modeled the way to make an inference. The ninth best practice is ensure that all voices are heard and honored by reducing teacher talk and prompting more student-led discussions. This can be seen in the 9th grade English lesson. This teacher also showed this best practice by facilitating strong student-led group discussions in each group. These groups were having very meaningful discussions about their own writing in the editing process that the teacher facilitated and guided with expertise. Her role as a facilitator of these groups, and she sometimes participated in the conversations. The last best practice is provide instruction in and practice with technologies that expand concepts and modes of communication. The lesson that relates to this best practice was done in a kindergarten classroom, where the students viewed various videos on a screen. Throughout the whole lesson, the students experienced various forms of technology because they used videos to gather their research on rainbows and tornadoes. They were also able to draw pictures and talk about what they learned, which are different varying modes of communication. In this lesson, the teacher was holding the rules of explicit instruction when giving the students information on rainbows, of modeling when describing how to listen to their partners, and facilitator when talking to the different pairs of students. Teacher dispositions are important to their success in the field and to the way they interact with students and other people in the school building. A disposition is a person's inherent qualities of mind and character, or the way that a person is naturally inclined to behave. These are shaped by personal beliefs and they are affected by personality. Helm said that there is a relationship between learning style and teacher dispositions, and the key dispositions detailed in her article of a teacher include initiative, fairness, decency, service, pro-social behavior, honesty, humility, trust, empathy, healing, and a sense of community. All of these dispositions or qualities can help a person to be a successful and effective teacher. According to the article by the Wadlingtons, disposition directly affects the effectiveness as a teacher. Teachers that are most successful have the characteristics of extroversion, intuitive, feeling, and perceiving. Teachers with these characteristics tend to have energy, creativity, and imagination, which allows students to feel more comfortable when talking to these teachers about personal issues. Having an extroverted personality can also help teachers when talking to parents or other staff members. Overall, having these different types of dispositions can indicate if a person will become a successful teacher in the future. They are not an end-all be-all, however, but they do impact the success of certain teachers. All right, next I will be talking about the different grouping practices. There are 5 different grouping practices that I will be discussing, and the information that I got for this section came from the sources listed on the screen. Whole class instruction is good for getting overall information out to the class at one time. When teaching a new concept or giving general information that all students would need to know, or when you're holding a class discussion, you would want to use whole group instruction. These lessons can take many forms, including lecture, discussion, debate, teacher demonstrations, and giving directions. In the 12th grade video, the teacher used whole class instruction in the form of a class discussion. The whole group of students were involved in one class discussion. Flexible small group instruction with same ability helps struggling students by working on one specific skill or strategy that those students need. It also allows students to work with their peers and feel more comfortable in the small group setting when it comes to addressing their own academic struggles. These groups can also allow the teacher to specifically target educational goals and personalize the lessons to the students in the groups. I can see this grouping style in the 4th grade English lesson because the teacher was working with a small group on a specific reading skill. Flexible small group instruction mixed ability encourages medium ability groups to learn at higher levels. It allows students to get to know others in the classroom. Students may not enjoy mixed ability grouping because there is an uneven division of labor. But to combat this, the teacher can assign roles in the groups to spread out the workload. These groups are good for engaging projects that the students can work together to complete. I saw an example of this type of group in the 11th, 12th grade English lesson when the students were working together in small groups to determine the meaning of vocabulary words in Hamlet. Using pairs or partners in the classroom helps students to think individually about a topic or answer to a question, but then run it by another student for their opinion or their ideas about the question. It teaches students to share ideas with classmates, and it builds oral communication skills. It helps focus attention and engage students in comprehending the reading material that they're working with. Think pair shares are a great way to have students quickly work with a classmate to share an answer or to find an answer. There are other ways to have students work in pairs, like they can work together to complete a worksheet or a project, or they could do an experiment together. I saw an example of Think Pair Share in the kindergarten lesson. The students took a few seconds to think of an answer to the teacher's question, and when it was time, they shared it with their partner. This lesson also helped the students work on their listening skills because they had to listen to what their partner had to say. One-on-one instruction allows the teacher to work directly with the student. This is a great time for assessment, getting to know the student, and for addressing their specific learning needs. I saw an example of this in the first grade English lesson. The teacher had the students paired up to work on the assignment, but as she was walking around the room, she had short conferences with each student. She would ask them to explain the part they connected with in the story and why, and then she had them read that part aloud to her to check their reading. This was a great example of how to work one-on-one with a student during a larger lesson. And now on to the conclusion. So this semester, I have learned so much about theories and using evidence-based practices in the classroom. It was really interesting to take the deep dive into all of the different theories that were outlined in the Lenses on Reading book. I think that going through all of the different time periods and all of the different categories of theory really helped me to understand how many there are out there and how they all connect in some weird way. Like, you can always find a theory for something that you're working with in the classroom, and you should always find a theory for something that you're working with in the classroom. Everything you use in your classroom should be backed up by evidence, backed up by theory, and that is something that I will take away from this course. The evidence-based practices that were discussed in the Morrow and Graham Bell book were really interesting, and they all seemed like things that we should know going into teaching and that we should have already been thinking about, but just seeing them outlined in a quick list of 10 evidence-based best practices for literacy instruction was really impactful to see it all there on one page. I also enjoyed completing the grouping part of this project because while I already knew about those different grouping patterns, it was interesting to read different articles that explained it in more detail, and it was cool to see it in practice in the videos that we had to watch for this course. Being able to watch 20 different videos of teachers teaching in their classroom and pick out theory is something that I didn't think I would be able to do. It sounds like a daunting task to watch a video and identify when teachers are doing something specific, but after sitting down to do it, it was very helpful in my overall understanding of using these theories in the classroom. And I think that it was a good type of field experience that I wouldn't have gotten if I had just been in a classroom regularly. Overall, I think this course really helped me to get a better grasp on theory in education and how I can take all of this stuff that I've learned this year and use it in my future classroom. So thank you. And then just a reminder that all of my references were in the heading slides for each section. And I forgot to mention when I started going through the theory section that I listed each field video that I watched with the case number and the grade and the subject. So they are all on there. And yeah, thank you for listening.